Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and, spiritually complex idea from a sermon, the concept of a family altar. We're going to break down what that even means, how it's believed to affect families through generations, and the very specific steps laid out to deal with it.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get a handle on what a family altar actually is. Then, we'll get into this idea that it has a voice that echoes through the years. From there, we'll look at the path to forgiveness. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by talking about a new kind of sacrifice that changes the whole game.
So, first things first, what in the world is a family altar? Well, right off the bat, the sermon we're pulling from makes it super clear we are not talking about a physical object here, but something much deeper, a spiritual foundation with roots that you just can't see.
So yeah, this is not a piece of furniture in your house. Think of it more like a spiritual hotspot, a point of contact where, generations ago, ancestors made binding spiritual agreements. These agreements then became this center of power, this center of influence that just keeps affecting the family line.
And here's the real kicker. Its influence is supposed to be totally unseen, but you feel it, deeply. The sermon describes this foundation as operating in darkness, which is just a way of saying that its effects on a family, things like recurring problems or negative patterns, are really hard to trace back to their spiritual source. So how does this invisible influence actually work? Well, according to the sermon, these altars aren't just sitting there collecting spiritual dust. No, they're described as having an active, living voice within the family.
And the sermon really hammers this point home. It's this idea of an active, speaking force. It's not just a memory of something that happened long ago. It's a present-day influence that is constantly making demands and reinforcing those old patterns that were set in motion by ancestors.
So what does this voice actually do? Well, it's kind of like a spiritual multitasker. The altar is seen as this spiritual ledger recording all the old contracts in family history. And then it enforces those patterns. It's even said to speak to the hearts of people, shaping their feelings and choices without them ever realizing where it's coming from.
And this brings us to one of the biggest problems that the sermon highlights, this generational link. The power of these altars isn't just some historical factoid. It's presented as something that's happening right now, being passed down from one generation to the next.
This timeline really lays out the whole idea of a spiritual inheritance, doesn't it? It all starts with the forefathers, and their actions set off this chain reaction. The next generations feel the consequences, and the sermon's point is that this pattern will just keep going and going, unless someone steps in and spiritually breaks that chain.
So when you boil it all down, the core issue the sermon is getting at is this. Ongoing family problems aren't just seen as random or bad luck. They're framed as possible symptoms of an old spiritual contract from the past that has never ever been dealt with.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the fix? The sermon doesn't just diagnose the issue and leave you hanging. It actually outlines a very clear spiritual game plan for taking apart the power of these family altars.
So, the solution comes in 3 clear steps. It all starts with asking for forgiveness for what the ancestors did. Then, step 2 is about bringing in a higher spiritual authority. In this belief system, the blood of Jesus acts like the ultimate legal power that can completely nullify those old agreements. And the final step? It's a direct command, like a spiritual eviction notice, to any forces that are tied to that old contract.
Now this quote, and yeah, it's a little fragmented in the original transcript, but it really gets to the heart of the personal declaration that's needed here. It's all about a fundamental shift in identity and belief, a personal, powerful affirmation that you are forgiven, and because of that, you are free from the old contract's power.
All right, this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle here, and it all revolves around sacrifice. See, since those old altars were built on sacrifices, the solution presented has to involve a superior sacrifice, one powerful enough to just completely overwrite them.
And this chart really puts it all side by side. On the one hand, you've got the sacrifices from the past, made by forefathers, which created these binding spiritual contracts. But on the other hand, you have what's called the ultimate sacrifice. This is framed as a single, final act that creates a brand new deal, a new covenant that offers freedom and makes all those old spiritual debts totally void.
So what's the bottom line here? The whole idea is that this belief system provides a definitive spiritual countermove. The goal isn't to fight fire with fire, it's to use something so much more powerful that it just puts the old fire out.
This new sacrifice is seen as something that completely shatters the chain, effectively bankrupting that old spiritual debt and canceling its authority over you.
And all of this leaves us with a much bigger question to chew on, right? If we step back from this specific sermon, it really makes you think about how all the unseen beliefs and the stories we inherit can shape who a family becomes. It kind of begs the question, what are the symbolic altars in our own family histories, and how much power are we really giving them?